The Earl of Breton was a prominent figure of art in the Kingdom of Lancaster. He was bathed in compliments for his fine, colorful style. Now, the Earl is known as the very Hand of God, but only those who are not familiar with him call him that. However, some of the Count's works were actually paintings by his wife. The Countess wondered to her interlocutor what he thought about the portrait she was holding in her hands. The man was interested in the work, but it was not clear why the Countess of Breton allowed her husband to get all the glory. Elton, the most influential media company in the kingdom, owned by the Duke of Sussex. The woman asked for her husband's true story to be published. The Countess clutched the effigy in her hand and said she just wanted her life back. The woman lost her parents when she was still young and was left as the sole heiress. But the main character's pain was healed by Ryan, who made a vow to the girl that he always wanted to be with her. She tied her future to Ryan. It was time for the protagonist to let go of the past. The women were having a sweet conversation, and one of them asked if a second son was ready. Her interlocutor said that right now the guy was having trouble inheriting property and getting a title. Ryan drank wine and did not understand what the point with the title of Count, because every man should find a way to become famous, asking his wife's opinion. The protagonist wanted to fulfill all his desires. The man did not understand what he had done that God was punishing him so much. The girl even had to write his name on paintings, only if all the glory went to him. The protagonist did this in order for her husband to be happy. The women were talking, and the Countess was asked by her interlocutor whether the Count was rarely at home. The girl lowered her eyes and agreed, saying that he tells her that he works in the workshop, but lately he comes back drunk. Also, once when he came home, he smelled of another woman's perfume. The girl noticed it when she hugged her husband. Ryan denied everything and was rude to his wife, swearing because she wanted to accuse him of something obscene. The companion said that partly it is also the main character's fault. The girl said that in her opinion, Inez was not very attractive to men because they don't like disturbed women like Inez, and asked the protagonist to remember that. Inez didn't understand what she should do in such a situation. Her friend said that if she were in her place, she would have left the Count alone. This surprised the protagonist and didn't understand what it meant. The friend said that the Count loves freedom, and it would be better to give it to him, and maybe that would save their relationship. The friend took Inez's hand and asked her to listen to her. After all, she is only saying this because she cares. Inez smiled and thanked Charlotte, for she really appreciated her friend's support. Inez was worried that it had been 3 days, but Ryan still hadn't returned from the workshop. The main character was worried that something had happened to him, or maybe he had a lot of work to do. It was just that today was Ryan and Inez's wedding anniversary. But Inez thought that he must be very busy and decided to take him some food, and even imagined Ryan's face when he would see Inez. Inez hoped her husband would be surprised, packed a basket, and set off. The main character loved her husband with all her soul. He was her childhood friend. That was enough. Inez went to the door and heard a woman's voice there. She moved a little closer to the door and realized that it was just as she thought. The girl was asking the Count what he would do if Inez found out about their relationship and hoped the man would stay with her. Ryan hugged Charlotte and promised that he would stay with her either way. Inez entered the room, and seeing Charlotte on the table and Ryan beside her, she missed the basket and everything shattered. The main character didn't realize what it all meant after what happened in the workshop. Ryan changed his attitude towards Inez and tried to change her mind. The Count constantly apologized and said that it was just a mistake and nothing serious, because men sometimes behave like children. He said he would straighten things out with Charlotte. Ryan hugged his wife against her will and said that Inez was her only one. Tears were showing in the eyes of the main character. She couldn't deny him for such a thing. Inez still loved Ryan. The girl thought it was strange that she wanted to know why Ryan cheated on her. The protagonist assumed that she wasn't good enough for the Count. The protagonist thought that if she tried even harder, and if he could become more famous, he would go back to Inez. And one day it happened. Ryan walked up to Inez and praised his wife for working very hard. Inez was mortified and said that Ryan was the one helping her. All of a sudden, Ryan asked if Inez thought it was time for them to get a divorce, and said with a smile that she was no longer the Countess of Breton. The man started to say that Inez is a complete psychopath because she is apathetic, paranoid, and hallucinating, and that's why it's time to end it all. And he added that Inez would be coming for her soon. This is where Ryan and Inez said goodbye. Inez was in complete shock, for she was now the former Countess of Brainton. The protagonist needed to escape. She couldn't let them put her away. Inez didn't understand how it had come to this. A carriage was rushing towards the girl. Someone started yelling about the carriage hitting a person. People quickly ran up to Inez and asked her how she was feeling. A man was calling for people with a stretcher. Inez dedicated her life to Ryan. She gave him her title, her fame, and her life. The main character had given him everything, and the girl was in a lot of pain, which brought tears to her eyes. And now Inez wanted to get everything back. The girl remembered Ryan's words about being a psychopath and Charlotte's words about taking care of her friend. It was all a dream, and Inez was woken up by one of the maids. The girl was covered in sweat, and it bothered the woman, and she asked the lady if she was having a nightmare. The woman's name was Mary, and Inez was in her room. The girl decided that it was probably all a bad dream. Mary came up and smiled and said that Inez was probably tired, but it was understandable because it was such an important day. The main character was surprised, and Mary said that today was their wedding anniversary. Inez was very surprised and asked her again, but she didn't wait for an answer and asked what date it was. This surprised the maid, but she apologized and said that today was May 28, 1825. The maid noticed how the mistress grabbed her head and began to worry whether her mistress had become ill. Inez was shocked that it was 1825 and didn't understand how she could forget the worst day of her life. Today marked 3 years since Inez found out that her husband was cheating on her with a friend of Inez herself. The main character grabbed her head because she was back on the worst wedding anniversary of her life. Mary asked if Inez was sure she didn't want to take a break. The girl answered nothing, instead asking why so much food had been served. The maid was surprised and said it was a celebratory udon in honor of the Count and Countess's anniversary. Inez tried to say something but ended up apologizing and asking Mary to leave her alone for a while. Mary started to worry and said she thought the lady wasn't feeling well, but the protagonist claimed she was fine and had nothing to worry about. Inez remembers everything. That wine, the food, the flowers she personally picked to decorate the table, all this to make Ryan happy. The main character started breaking everything and throwing it off the table. She pulled down the tablecloth and said that there was no such thing as good. The husband Inez loved with all her heart and her best friend. The man who was all the world to Inez, but he never loved Inez. It was only now that Inez realized how stupid she was and began to sob. Her love for Ryan was pathetic, and her friendship with Charlotte was meaningless. The main character was ashamed. Inez got down on her knees and realized that she had been too naive in the past. A few days later, Inez thought about the fact that no one had seen Ryan that day and assumed he was on a date with Charlotte. The protagonist decided that she had had enough crying, and now it was time to get to work. The first thing the protagonist has to do is get back everything Ryan has taken from her. The best way to get her fortune and title back is probably divorce. According to the laws of the kingdom, in order to dissolve a marriage between aristocrats, you have to give the king a valid reason. But there's a problem. This is the Society of the Kingdom of Lancaster. The men are in charge, and they can make their way in the outside world. And the women have to take care of the home. The Kingdom of Lancaster is the most conservative in their region. The problem wasn't the laws. It was the social status that doesn't allow women to divorce. Not unless they make a fuss and convince the king to understand Inez. The protagonist decided to make a scandal and wondered how she hadn't thought of it before. Ryan's reputation as an artist is the result of drawing and exhibiting Inez's paintings, and the protagonist decided that she could tell everyone that he is not a real artist, that he exhibited her paintings under his name. Ryan's abilities are mediocre. They were never hand of God paintings. And if only Inez could tell the world about it. A servant entered the room and apologetically announced that he had brought a fresh newspaper for Leah. Elton, this is the most influential newspaper in the kingdom. Ryan used to publish Inez's paintings there, and with that, the Earl achieved the title of the best artist in the kingdom. The girl wondered if she could somehow publicly expose Ryan through the Elton. Ryan burst into the room. The man was all red and angry. Ryan started talking about how her husband had just returned and she couldn't leave the house, adding that it was a disgrace. Earl walked over to his wife and snatched the newspaper out of her hands. Looking at it, he realized it was Elton. He said she was a typical woman as she looked for gossip in the paper. Ryan was the author of constant phrases toward Inez. He kept saying that it was pathetic or expected of a woman. But Inez wasn't ready to keep putting up with it and said it was ridiculous, asking if that was all from what Ryan had to say. The man's face flickered in surprise. Inez asked Ryan with a smile if he was going to ask her if the prices had gone up. The man said nothing, and Inez asked with a smirk if it was the same thing. Inez asked if they weren't the same since they were both enjoying this time. Ryan didn't understand what the girl was referring to and warily asked. The girl said that Mary must have sent someone since Inez had been sick, and he never showed up even though his wife was bedridden. Ryan yelled that it was all because the job was urgent, and Inez should realize that herself. But Inez said that she didn't understand it and asked Ryan with a smile what was wrong. The man said with awkwardness in his voice that he had a conversation to have with her. Ryan asked if Inez knew that the New Year's ball this time would be held at the royal palace. Every year, the royal family threw a banquet to celebrate the new year. Inez realized that this is a great opportunity to make a good impression on the royal family. Everyone is anxious to get there. Ryan has noticed that this celebration is quite different from the previous one, and even more so, the Duke of Sussex himself would be there. That surprised Inez. The Duke of Sussex is King Edward's younger brother. He was the king's right-hand man before he came to the throne. Ryan added that there was something else important for Inez. The girl froze in anticipation. Inez remembered that the Duke of Sussex was the owner of the Eltons. Ryan said that the Duke supported talented artists, and everyone who had been sponsored by the man had reached unprecedented heights. Ryan turned to Inez and said this is her chance, a chance to be the best artist in this country, so Inez should get ready and get herself in proper shape. Even in the past, Ryan has always seen Inez as a servant and a way to achieve his ambitions. But now things are different, and Inez has given herself a goal that she will be able to meet the Duke. And if the girl could only get him to publish the article, then everything would go as planned. Mary, observing the mistress, noticed that lately she had become very weary. Inez used to be busy either cooking or embroidering and thinking about whether Ryan would like the result. Now she's doing nothing. Mary would really like to help her. Another maid turned to Mary and told her that Baron Jason's Lady Baron was on the first floor right now. Mary was sure Inez would feel better after talking to the Baron's wife. Mary said with a smile that Baron Jameson's Lady Baron came to visit them. Inez was surprised and asked if they had an appointment together. Mary said that she had come on her own. Charlotte had always acted in her own way, and she wasn't backing down now. Indeed, she'd been looking down on Inez for so long. It made the protagonist very angry. Charlotte burst into the room and asked why Inez was taking so long to come out, and added that she had heard that her friend was sick. The girl looked up with a smile and a spark in her eyes. The girl put her things aside and asked if Inez was really sick, for she looked quite chipper. Again, not waiting for an answer, Charlotte said that the New Year's Eve ball was coming up. Charlotte asked if Inez would be attending the ball. Inez confirmed that she would, and Charlotte was very excited, but said that she doesn't really have a carriage to go to the ball. So Charlotte wants to ask Inez to borrow her carriage since they are friends. Mary was totally shocked that Charlotte would seriously want to ride in the marital carriage, because even if they are in a close relationship, she can't do that. Charlotte walked over to Inez and took her hands. In her thoughts, the girl noticed that Charlotte had a very sly smile on her face. After all, she and Ryan were going to send Inez to a treatment center. Inez was in the dark until she returned. The girl indicated to Charlotte to let go of her hands. This really surprised Charlotte. Inez had ordered her not to touch her so carelessly if Charlotte knew what decorum was. This was despite the fact that they were friends. Inez apologized and said she wasn't feeling well today, so Charlotte should leave her alone. The main character said goodbye to Charlotte and Ryan, because now they have a new Inez in front of them. The girl said goodbye to her only friend. Royal Palace. King Edward was pleased that the Duke of Sussex was also going to the ball. His name is Enoch Fitzroy von Lancaster. The king told the Duke to relax, for such seriousness was not necessary. Edward asked if the lad was so unhappy that he made him go to the ball. Enoch asked what His Majesty was thinking. The king said with a smile that it was a great chance to meet a young and lovely individual. The king really wanted Enoch to get married sooner already. The Duke thought the king was a total creep. He said he would come to the opening of the ball and then leave. The king said that the Duke should dress nicely. After all, Enoch should be aware that the lady of his heart might be there. Enoch went out and thought about the lady. To him it was a laugh, and that was all it was. Ryan stood outside waiting for his wife with a disgruntled face. When Inez came in, he snorted in her direction and asked what was taking her so long. The girl's outfit nearly knocked Ryan off his feet. He said that Inez was crazy because it was too pretty of an outfit. Inez asked with a smile what was the big deal, because she had heard that everyone would be dressed fancy at the ball. Ryan resented it because he was trying to be nice, but Inez decided to embarrass him. Inez walked up and grabbed Ryan by the tie, saying that he came here in a first-class suit. And the girl asked if it would still be embarrassing if a person came to the prom in shabby clothes. Inez headed in the direction of the carriage. The protagonist was wearing earrings given to her by her mother. And if Inez didn't come back, Charlotte would be wearing them. The protagonist decided that she would rewrite her destiny. Baroness Wickham noticed Inez and was very surprised. The protagonist remarked that they hadn't seen each other in a long time, and the woman was shocked at the fact how superb the Countess looked today. Many guests did not understand why the Countess of Briarton was so dressed. After all, she always came in rags. Another lady said she had heard that the Count had neglected his wife, but it was probably just a rumor. Charlotte was completely shocked when she saw Inez. The girl asked what the head heroine's outfit was. Charlotte said that she had already said that a solid colored outfit would not look better than a multicolored one. All of this, she said with a sneer. It was a lie, because Charlotte always said it when Inez stood out in a crowd. Inez said with a smile that she thought it made her look even prettier, and she liked the outfit a lot. After all, seeing Inez in this dress, Baroness Wickham had complimented her. Charlotte was completely shocked, for her friend had always obeyed her. Inez added that when she dressed at Charlotte's discretion, no one complimented her. And the main character believes that her own style is better than Charlotte's. Ryan came over and angrily asked what Inez was talking about. Charlotte was very happy to see the Count. A man angrily asked why Inez was talking so rudely to Lady Jason. The man figured that Inez had decided to humiliate him with her behavior, since they were best friends, and Inez had decided to pick a fight with her in public. Ryan thought it was a great chance, because Inez had been acting too cocky lately, and public humiliation would be good for her. The Duke of Sussex began to enter the room, saying that he felt he had come at a bad time. Inez began to realize that this was the man she needed. The man said that the Earl of Briarton's paintings were quite good, and he had come here to meet him in person, and added that as emotional as he was, Ryan shouldn't raise his voice in a place like this. Ryan apologized. Duke brought up that the Earl had been successful in the art world, and it had sort of happened after his marriage to the Countess. Duke assumed that after the marriage, Ryan's wife stayed by his side and gave her support. And today was a great day, and there was no need for unnecessary strife, so they should enjoy the banquet. After these words, Duke turned around and apologized and started to leave, and hoped all the guests had a good time. Inez was very pleased, because the Duke was the first person who appreciated her efforts. The main character was so touched that she was ready to cry right there. The Duke stood on the balcony and realized that he couldn't help but show up there. But these people are unbearable. Turning back, the man saw the Countess of Briarton in front of him. The girl greeted the Duke. The man didn't understand Inez's reason for being here. The protagonist said that her words might seem strange, but asked if the Duke knew why her husband did not paint portraits of other people. The Duke didn't understand anything the woman wanted to say. Pensive, the Duke himself remarked that he had never heard of portraits painted personally by the Count, although famous artists like him must have many orders. The protagonist decided not to languish and said it's because Ryan can't paint, and the Duke of Briarton's paintings are not actually painted by him. At the exhibition, guests marveled at the Earl of Briarton's new work. Connoisseurs did not understand how a novice could paint such masterpieces. His Excellency was simply fascinated by the Earl's painting. The Duke said that such beauty is mesmerizing, and according to rumors, the Duke deserves to be called the artist with the hand of God. Until now, all the paintings published in the name of the Earl of Briarton. They do not actually belong to him. This surprised the Duke, and he asked in confusion what the lady meant. Inez said that to be fair, Ryan had achieved fame through another artist, and he wasn't really a real artist. Duke asked if everything his wife said was true. Wouldn't it offend the Lancaster art world? The Duke, without waiting for an answer, asked if the woman could prove her words. Inez confirmed that she could prove it. The woman took out paper and pencil. The Duke assumed she was trying to draw a picture. The man was surprised because her movements were so fluid, like water in a stream. Her painting was beautiful, and the man realized that all this time she had been hiding her talent. Inez said she was finished. The woman held out her hand with the portrait to the Duke. She drew it. The protagonist confessed that Ryan's artist was herself. Duke said to stop, as she didn't need to explain anymore. The Duke was surprised that the name stolen by the Count belonged specifically to his wife, Inez. It was now clear why no one had ever seen the Count at work. Inez said that was right, for if he painted in front of others, everyone would know his secret. The Duke decided to inquire why the Countess had decided to reveal this secret. It was difficult for the woman to talk about it now, but she could say one thing. The Duke's reputation would not suffer. Inez said she would be leaving now and asked him to inform her of his decision. The man with a smile told the Countess to look at next week's Etalon advertisement, for his answer would be there. The man came closer and said that the Countess had graphite on her hands. He handed her some napkins and asked her to wipe her hands before going inside. Inez thanked the Duke and went inside. She was greeted there by Ryan with a glass. He asked where she was when the banquet was in full swing. The protagonist apologized and said that today she wanted to return to the mansion early and rest. This really surprised the man. But Inez said that he could stay here and she would go alone. But in a flash, the man changed his face and told her to go rest. He would stay because it was a social life and she should understand that. The girl was glad that she had finally done it and talked to Duke Sexky. Inez hoped very much that he would accept her proposal. A few days later, a reply came from His Excellency. It was quite unexpected and very bold. In the letter, he wrote that there had been a conversation 3 nights ago that he hadn't forgotten, and he wanted to discuss her gift in more detail, and the Duke would look forward to their meeting. Signing the sheet, the man indicated at the bottom that he was from S. The Count thought about the fact that if the Countess was indeed right, it would amount to a betrayal of the Empire and the art world. It is almost impossible for women and commoners to make a name for themselves. But it's also impossible to abuse one's fame. And the Count should have known that. But Inez's ability is unparalleled. A servant came to the Duke's room and informed him that the Countess of Briarton had arrived. If it was true, it would be a sensation. The Duke ordered the Countess to come in. Inez saluted his superiority. The Duke said hello too and asked how the girl was feeling. Inez said she was doing well thanks to him. Duke suggested that they move on to continue their conversation. The man said that he thought it was all a bit strange because it was very hard for an artist to hide his working process. And if it was his wife who was painting, then it is understandable why Ryan refused to paint in public. But the Count's questionable behavior was no reason to trust Inez. There was an awkward silence. If everything the Countess said was true, then the Duke should take action immediately. But to do so, he would need the Countess's help. The Briarton family holds a high position in the Empire, and help would not be considered political gamesmanship. It's just that it will be difficult. Inez suddenly said that there is another reason, and the Duke is a very kind man, and she knows that he can't help her. So the woman wants to offer a job that no one will get hurt. Duke interjected what the protagonist was talking about. Duke owns Elton and is a journalist. However, Inez wants to completely destroy her husband and become an independent woman. Herzog said that this is certainly quite an interesting story, but it would be better for the girl to talk to her husband about it. After all, if Inez wants to write an article about it, there must be a good reason. The Duke asked what the woman wanted to achieve through exposing the Count. Inez said that she is nothing to Ryan because he has another woman. And that woman is the protagonist's friend, Charlotte Jason. These two betrayed Inez. and it's notoriously difficult for a duke in their country to win a divorce on grounds of adultery. Inez's whole life has been wasted on him, so that everyone would know Briatron's name, and Inez wants to get back everything that is rightfully hers. The man admired the Countess's determination. Inez's goal is the complete confiscation of all property and title that actually belongs to her. Inez wishes to change society's mind through the Eltons. The Duke asks if the girl is sure of this. Elton is a major newspaper read by most citizens. And once published, the scandal will affect not only the Count, but Inez as well. And the article is certainly tempting, but as for the wounds of the protagonist, it is worth thinking hard about. Inez's husband wants nothing but power and wealth, and now a stranger cares for her more than her own husband. It was rather amusing, but Inez had already made up her mind. The Duke said that if it was already decided, the article should become a sensation for everyone to see. The girl thanked the Duke. The man said that the most important thing remained. Inez did not understand what he was talking about. The Duke said that the Countess must prove that the paintings published under the Count's name are her personal ones. The Duke said that he had several works, so Inez needed to repaint them. The girl decided to get to work. The protagonist braided her hair, and it felt as if it had been an eternity, but in fact, 3 years. A lot of things had changed. The only thing that hadn't changed was the protagonist's talent. It's the same as always. Inez doesn't paint for herself. The Duke asked if the Countess was finished. The protagonist was frightened because she didn't expect the Duke to be watching. The man apologized for scaring her. Inez said that there is still a little bit left, but the Duke said that you cannot worry about it. After all, only a fool would not believe his own eyes. The Duke wished the protagonist a promising future. After all, it is the Countess of Briarton who has the hand of God. The Lord wished a successful trip to the Countess and asked her to be careful on the road. The girl took out a handkerchief, and the Duke realized that this one was the same one he had given the girl at the ball. Inez said with a smile that he had helped her out a lot then. The Duke didn't understand why the girl was smiling like that, as if it was the first time they had met. The protagonist thought that he was not pleased, but the gentleman said that it was not at all, just that she should be careful on the way home. When the girl arrived home, she asked the maid what was wrong with Ryan. She didn't say anything. Inez went to his room and saw that he was sound asleep, for he was drunk. He had a woman's lip print on the scruff of his collar. The servant began to read out a message. It said that as a result of an investigation some years ago, the paintings of the Earl of Briarton had become widely known, and they were painted excellently. But they were not painted by the Earl at all. It also said that his relationship with Baroness Jason had been investigated. But the gentleman did not listen to the servant, for he was enchanted by the picture that Inez had painted. The servant asked if the Duke was listening to him. The man apologized, and the servant noticed that the gentleman was still interested in the identity of the mysterious painter. The Duke asked that the servant look into it as well, for it was not just a hobby, but a very real talent. As a child, Enoch Fitzroy von Lancaster found it difficult to hide his true feelings. A prince was so gifted that he could have taken the succession away from King Edward. The more powerful his excellency became, the more envious he became. Men talked about how the lad was so young and already a genius, and wondered if Prince Edward's appointment as crown prince should be postponed. Turning to Enoch, the men told him not to forget Mr. Felix when he ascended the throne. After all, they are all one family. The prince had an older brother, Edward. Guy asked the prince what he wanted. The lad assumed that Enoch cried a lot and said that if someone offended him, he could speak, and the older brother would go and punish the offender. Of course, the noble's words are just empty sound. A servant came over and told His Majesty that it looked like unrest could not be avoided. The guy realized that even after his refusal to give up the throne, people were long resentful, and it was the same here. So this was a great opportunity. The topic was so provocative that it would attract the attention of even the people of the empire. And the more circulation, the more noise. The Countess Briarton is indeed a genius, but she ruined her talent by hiding in the Earl's shadow, so the Duke feels sorry for her. The servant asked what the Lord was going to do. After thinking about it, Enoch said that first it would be a good idea to get the attention of the people of the kingdom. The Duke decided that they would organize an exhibition. However, the exhibition would include the works of this countess. Hearing this, the servant said that there would be mayhem. The Duke knew this and said that, of course, there would be no mess, but rumors would start. The title of this exhibition will be the title of the article. The aristocratic community was already talking about a new article about the owner of the Elton holding an art exhibition. It was the Duke of Sussex himself, and they assumed that he just wanted to support talented artists, because that way they would probably be heard of in the country. Everyone read the paper, Charlotte and Ryan and Inez. Something big was coming up called Sussex Artists. Ryan came to Inez's house with the paper. He asked if she had heard that the Duke of Sussex was having an art show. Inez asked why all of a sudden. Ryan looked grudgingly in his wife's direction and said it was his chance to shine even brighter, and said that a husband's success should be a source of pride for a wife. Ryan said he needed Inez to paint a picture. The man hoped Inez would do it. The girl looked up and told Ryan that it was the first time he was having lunch with her after all this time. Ryan was surprised and said that it was just an active social life and one could easily get lost in time, and added that it's a little hectic right now and will have to be up early and back late, and Inez should understand that. But from now on, he'll come home early, and he'd try to have lunch with her at the same time. Just for a moment. It was ridiculous. Inez said she'd think about it. The man began to thank his wife and said that he would not have lived without her. Inez was genuinely happy that Ryan had fallen into her trap. Ryan told Inez to paint a picture for the exhibit, and she reported it to the Duke. Enoch expected this, and the Count's greed knows no bounds, though such people are red. Now Inez and Enoch can follow their plan. Their plan is for Inez to paint a picture on behalf of the Count and send one on behalf of his wife. 2 paintings in the same style, and there will be discussion, and then people will denounce the Count's lies. The Duke said that, of course, it will not be an easy task because not everyone can write 2 identical paintings. Inez will have to try hard. The protagonist said that she should thank him for giving her a chance. Now all that's left to do is fill in the notes. The Duke asked if the Countess needed a place to work to paint 2 pictures at once, and if she did, Enoch would help. Inez thanked with a smile and said that it was fine and she could do it herself, since she already had an idea. The Duke was shocked, for he did not know that the Countess personally visits Huabang Street. Inez said with a smile that it was very convenient, and the necessary materials could be bought here. The protagonist is surprised that his superiority followed her. His beauty could not be hidden by any clothes and attention could not be avoided. The Countess noted that Mr. Ryan avoids the society of ordinary people, and the Duke attracts a lot of attention, and therefore it is desirable for them not to run into her husband. Inez boasted that she had recently opened an atelier here with her art materials. The girl was spotted by a woman who was very happy to see her, for it had been a long time since she had been here. The Duke asked the lady if this miss was the owner of the Countess's atelier. Inez said it was just easier for her to hide that way, so implored him to play along with her. The miss asked how Inez was doing. The woman beckoned to come over soon, because she wanted to show off the new brush she'd gotten recently. The woman said that if she needed a place for an atelier, she would help. After all, her top floor was empty and she could offer it, suggesting that it would be a perfect fit. Inez promised to think about it. The woman said that Mistress could go up there right now. She said she could have a look around, as the room was just right for an atelier. And there was a big window with a great view. It was amazing for the main character. The woman said she would be waiting for them downstairs. The Duke remarked that it was just a marvelous view down there that inspires one to create masterpieces. Inez confirmed this. Inez said that she wanted to submit this landscape for an exhibition. And if you think about it, this place is perfect for a heroine. The girl thanked the Duke for coming with her today. The Duke, embarrassed, said that he wanted to do it himself. But Inez said that nevertheless he had wasted his time and was probably hungry by now. Inez held out the sandwich to the Duke and asked if he would like to try it, but immediately realized that she was very stupid because there is no way that the Duke of Sussex ate something like that. The Duke is an aristocrat and such people do not eat such food because it is food for the poor. The woman realized that she had made a big mistake. The Duke thanked her for her concern and took the sandwich. However, he added that this one was too good for a regular sandwich. The man offered Inez a bet. The protagonist was very surprised And the Duke went on to say that if she succeeded in her plans and got back everything that was rightfully hers, she would treat the Duke to dinner. Inez was pleasantly surprised from the fact that the Duke wanted to have dinner with her. The girl agreed with a smile and added that she would treat him to the most delicious food there was. Enoch was ready to look forward to it. They exchanged smiles. The Duke came with a basket to Inez's atelier. The man said hello to Miss Reyna and asked where Lady Inez was. The woman said she was in the atelier and was surprised from the fact that Inez had not told him she would be painting. Miss Reyna said that Inez had told her that she wanted to paint a picture for the Duke of Sexky's exhibition, and added that although the paintings were delightful, Inez did not think at all about her health. Suddenly, Miss Reyna came closer and asked with a smile what the man's relationship with Inez was. The man didn't know how to answer that. The woman said that he comes every day, hence he likes Inez. The man got embarrassed and just went upstairs to the lady. The man wondered from the fact that it looked somehow romantic. He realized that he had to be extremely careful, for if this came out, there would be a lot of trouble. The Duke knocked on the room and entered. He was mesmerized by Inez's masterful drawing. Inez was very frightened at this sudden visit from the Duke. The woman told him not to come in. Enoch said that he knocked twice without Inez noticing it. The protagonist apologized because she has a tendency to not notice anything around her when she's drawing. The Duke smiled and said that it was because Miss was very focused on her work, and added that he had bought some food and asked if Miss wanted to have a meal. The man said that he thought a sandwich such as Inez gave him the other day was very much to the lady's liking, so he bought them. The main character was hit with a wave of memories when she found out about the affair and her wedding anniversary, but she quickly came out of them and thanked the Duke. Inez said it was the first time anyone had ever cared about her. Inez told the Duke with a smile that she was almost finished with the painting and wondered if he wanted to see it. After all, it would be nice for him to appreciate her work right away. The Duke was glad to see them first. It was a flower store in the morning. Inez said that this painting would be exhibited under her name. The girl showed the second painting and it made the Duke think, for it was like a series of landscapes. Inez said that she had painted it that way on purpose, for they were similar, and then everyone would guess that the author was the same. The Duke remarked that her plan had worked. Inez was glad that His Excellency liked it. The man asked if he could pick up the finished painting. The protagonist hesitated and said that she would probably take it home first, because maybe Ryan would like it and change his mind. The man realized that she was still holding on to her husband, and at least she hoped to get words of approval from him for her talent. Inez arrived home and asked Mary to have all of her things taken to her room. Inez saw Ryan, who had just returned and heard the horrible odor of alcohol coming from him. The Countess turned to her husband and said that she'd already finished a painting for a show and thought he might want to see it. Ryan said that there was no need for him to look at the painting, as she knew that he trusted her completely on such things. The man turned around and started to walk away, besides asking if Inez would mind him having a drink at the mansion. The protagonist was hurt, but she agreed. Opening day of the exhibition. The guests were stunned from the fact that the exhibition would be held in the royal palace, but it was actually not surprising because it was the Duke of Sexky. The head of the Royal Society of Arts, named Marquis Asher, did not understand why there was so much noise, because no matter how many paintings were brought, only the worthy ones would be chosen. After all, this pavilion is the place where the paintings of the best artists of the country will be exhibited. The servant offered the head to go inside and look around. The man did not understand why there was such a fuss. The Marquis did not understand what was the matter. His servant said that a painting by the Earl of Briarton was on display. The man asked the Marquis to take a look himself. These paintings were essentially the same. Inez was surprised from the number of people who came to the exhibition. The girl didn't understand how she was going to get to the center of the hall now. People greeted the Countess and talked about those two paintings and could not believe that one of them was painted by the Countess, because the works looked as if the author was the same. Many guests were skeptical of the Countess and didn't know what she was thinking when she said it was her painting. It was something Inez had been working towards for so long, and it was quite hard for the protagonist to get so much attention. However, Inez's life had changed from the past. Now the protagonist was happy with everything. Duke Sexkey was happy to see Countess Briarton, who finally visited the art exhibition. The Duke took Inez's hand and kissed it, saying that he was very pleased. All the guests were in complete shock, for they didn't know they were so close. Enoch said in a whisper that Inez had drawn enough attention to herself. The protagonist remarked that the Duke was quite bold. The Duke gave his hand to the Countess and asked if they could go, since this exhibition was for Inez. The Duke decided to get a moment of attention to introduce the Countess. The man asked everyone to be distracted for a moment and asked to be allowed to introduce the Countess of Briarton, for she was the author of the decoration for this exhibition. The Duke continued to praise the main character and said that she was not just an artist, but the hand of God. People began to realize that Countess Briarton was the artist, and therefore it was she who had painted the picture of Count Briarton. Charlotte burst into Ryan's room. The Earl was sleepy and didn't understand what was wrong. Charlotte handed him a newspaper and told him it was a nightmare. The man didn't understand what it was, but when he read it more carefully, his face changed. There was an article about there being 2 similarly styled paintings in the Duke's exhibition and a screaming headline about the Earl of Briarton being a fraud. The man couldn't understand what was going on and assumed that Inez had submitted another painting under her name. Charlotte yelled at Ryan because it was the yellow press that almost the entire town had read. Ryan realized that he would have to fix the whole damn thing immediately. The man came to the Expo. People immediately started talking about him because he had the nerve to show up here, and with such an expression on his face. The Count started yelling at Inez. The Count grabbed Inez and asked if she realized what she had done and yelled that everything he wanted had collapsed because of her. The man didn't understand how this had happened. Inez took his hands and said that all he wished for was to take all the glory for himself. But Inez didn't want to paint for Ryan anymore. The man was in complete shock and asked again. Inez said she would repeat if he didn't hear. She wouldn't create for him again and asked how much longer he was going to use her. Ryan was like a parasite to Inez. The man began to be led away. He thought it was a mistake, and Inez had changed a lot. The Earl didn't realize what was going on, and then the Duke of Sussex walked into the room. The Earl said hello to him. Enoch said she was glad to meet him and to see a familiar face again. The Earl himself is at the Duke's exhibition, but no one is allowed to harm others here, and the Earl disregarded that, and this could cost Ryan his reputation. The Count only now realized that the article was from the Elton newspaper, and the owner was the Duke. That meant Enoch had been aware of it from the beginning. Inez told Ryan to go back to the mansion and added that a letter of dissolution would be sent soon. There was an article in the Elton newspaper about the Earl of Briarton's divorce proceedings and the dilemma of who would win. It was also written that the Countess had decided to make a drastic change in her life. People were thinking about who the artist really was. Edward, while reading the paper, told Enoch that he was shocked that they had such funny things going on. The king asked with a smirk if Enoch was ready for something more. The Duke was surprised and angered that his brother had called him there for this. Edward said he was only surprised that his brother was so interested in a woman, and he hadn't realized that Enoch might be interested in the opposite sex. The king decided to talk about the Countess, for since her marriage, she had not appeared much in society, and so he thought her life was a fairy tale. But in fact, it was so serious. Edward asked if he should go to the exhibition, but Enoch asked him to stop. After all, Inez was having a hard time without it. Enoch asked his brother not to burden anyone, but just sit and observe. And the Duke added that even if Edward visited the exhibition, he was unlikely to meet Countess Briarton there. After all, the woman was now busy with the process of divorcing the Earl. Eventually, Enoch asked His Majesty what the verdict would be. The man said with a smile that, to be honest, he didn't know. But he immediately became serious and said that he would give a final verdict that would not be biased against either side only after careful scrutiny. Edward doesn't know why, but if Enoch wants to support the Countess, he should be ready for his verdict. And by the way, he asks if Enoch liked Inez much. Hamilton Hotel. The men talked about the fact that the Countess of Briarton lived there. Many wanted to meet her. Inez was glad to have that problem solved, but now daily life was a drag. One day of the art show and all the headlines about the news. Ryan is playing the victim, but according to the news from Elton's paper, his excuses are worthless. In fact, Inez would love to kick him out of the mansion, but there's no need to think about that now, not until they're divorced. And indeed, the protagonist has gone all the way, and it's all thanks to the help of His Excellency. A servant knocked on the door and said that he knew the lady had told him not to let anyone in, but that Viscount Go's wife was looking for her downstairs. Viscount Go's wife is Ryan's mother and Inez's mother-in-law. She once stood with Inez holding hands, rejoicing because she is now part of her family and they are standing in such a beautiful mansion. The woman said that the pain of losing her parents could not be healed for her, but she would also become Inez's second mother. Inez rejoiced and thanked her current mother. However, Miss Guo's appearance was just a pretense. After the wedding, her father and Ryan had been siphoning off Brian's money. And this two-faced woman had belittled Inez to the point where she herself had become a mistress to her. Miss Go burst into the room and was indignant that she had come to visit, and there was no way she was being let in. She was very angry at such rude behavior. Miss said that she had heard about everything and was outraged that Inez had embarrassed Ryan at the art show, and she should at least realize what she had done. The woman yelled at Inez because if she became Ryan's wife, she should obey her son. She shouldn't even dare treat Ryan like that. Inez told her mother that she wanted to divorce Ryan. The woman laughed and said that no one needs her because she hasn't been able to produce an heir in all these years, so she has the nerve to talk about divorce. Miss Go said that Inez was putting Briarton's honor on the line. Inez calmly said that she didn't know why her mother was suddenly talking about Briarton's honor, but she wouldn't have to worry about it after her divorce from Ryan. Besides, Inez was overjoyed. Ms. called the whole thing crazy. The main character added that it remains to be seen about the kids. After all, Ryan had a partner with whom he'd spent countless nights together, and it was possible that Ryan already had children. The woman's face changed dramatically and began affectionately calling her sister-in-law her children and saying that she still doesn't know much about the world. The mother-in-law said that she understood how much Ryan's cheating had hurt her. However, men always do that, even if they briefly have fun outside the house. Inez lost her parents early and has never been attached to adults. The fact that mother always takes Ryan's side in matters of marriage, and the fact that Miss Go is targeting writer Beck's inheritance. Inez silently put up with it all, thinking it would make some sense, like a fool. The woman began to be led out of the room, for Inez had decided to call it a day. The miss was furious and called her sister-in-law names, saying that she shouldn't think she would easily get a divorce being a woman. The woman went on to say that Inez would never make it, and she would also beg for forgiveness from Miss Go. Someone came into the room and called out to the Countess. It was His Excellency Enoch. The man said that he decided to check if she was doing well, and this happened. Inez said that it was just her mother-in-law dropping by and it was a bit noisy. The Duke was surprised because he had told the steward not to let outsiders in and promised to see to it again. The main character said that it was not worth it, for he must be bothered by his mother as it was. The man wanted to say something, but stammering, the Duke still offered the Countess to move into his mansion. Inez was very surprised. The Countess and the Duke were walking through the fantastic forest right behind the house. Inez was mesmerized by the view of the forest. Because of her mother-in-law's intrusion, Inez couldn't stay at the hotel, and the Duke said he had several mansions and Inez could live in one of them. Until the court hearing, Inez stayed to live in Duke Enoch's villa. There was only one day left until the divorce hearing. The Duke asked how Inez was feeling. The woman did not even know what to answer because she was a little scared. This surprised Enoch because he didn't understand what it was from. Inez said that it was because it might happen that she would lose the cases and then she would have to live with Ryan as a spouse again. And if that happens, Inez probably won't be able to take it. Duke grabbed Inez and told her that wouldn't happen. After all, Inez will definitely win this case. The Duke said that he, as the owner of Elton, could assure Inez of that. The protagonist laughed, for she had never heard His Excellency raise his voice before. The man apologized and said it was because next to Inez he was a little relaxed. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed the rabbits and quickly called the Duke over to look at them. Inez said that she wanted to sketch them. The lady promised it would take about 5 or maybe 10 minutes, asking if the Duke would wait for her. The man smiled and told Inez to let her paint as long as she wanted. It was a very cute picture for Inez, for there was also a little bunny there. The man was embarrassed, for he remembered the girl's words that she had not yet heard His Excellency raise his voice. The next day, the day of the divorce hearing, the king announced that the hearing for the dissolution of the marriage of the Earl and Countess Briarton was to begin. The Briarton couple and their lawyers were ordered to take their seats in the courtroom. Edward decided to listen first to the Earl's side, who objected to the dissolution of the marriage. Those present in the room were shocked to see that the Earl of Briarton's attorney was not a divorce specialist, but Viscount Turner. The Earl had done well not to lose the case, for Viscount's services were precious. Turner turned to Edward and said that he thought that the very nature of the case was somewhat strange. After all, the problem is that the husband has appropriated the paintings and gained fame, so a petition for divorce is being filed. And he said that this is the Countess's argument, which is not supported by any facts. The king remarked that he had heard that two quite similar paintings had been exhibited. The Viscount justified this by saying that the Count and Countess had been at it for a long time, so the style might have become similar. The Viscount shouted that embarrassing the art world in the kingdom with false accusations and trying to dissolve the marriage being a woman could damage the reputation of the Count and the court. The man went on to say that it was all to mix both the court and the Earl with mud. The Duke was also in the audience. He realized that the reception of the audience was not as rosy as it seemed, for it was not entirely clear whether or not there had been a theft. Edward listened to everything and ordered the Countess's side to speak. The Countess's lawyer jumped up and introduced himself. His name was McDowell. The ladies in the courtroom were discussing the fact that the lawyer on the Countess's side was still quite young, and it seemed that the head of the family just hadn't been able to find a suitable lawyer for the Countess yet. Even though the Countess's lawyer was very young, Inez was also surprised by this at first. 2 years ago, Viscount McDowell had not yet shown as a lawyer, but in the future, he was called the first lawyer of the Lancaster Kingdom. And if Ryan's plan is just to hire a very expensive lawyer, Inez already has information about the future. McDowell said the attorney's presentation is starting. The man said that opposing counsel is claiming that the Earl and Countess have been co-creating together for a long time, and as a result of which their painting styles may have become similar. McDowell turned to Viscount and asked if that was true. The man at the Earl's side agreed. McDowell asked everyone present to look at this, pointing to the paintings from the exhibition. The Countess's attorney approached the Count and asked if he could describe the process of working on the painting Workshop Alley. The Count said that this work conveys the colorfulness of the street of workshops, and he tried to create transparency of color by controlling the concentration of paint so that it does not overlap in dense layers. Inez knew that Ryan didn't know much about painting at all, so she assumed that he was saying that on the advice of his lawyer. McDowell asked if the Count had worked dry erase paper in this way to avoid divots. The Count confirmed this with arrogance, his attorney aghast. The Count was grabbed by his own lawyer and asked if his work was strange. Inez's lawyer said with a smile that it was strange because the painting was done in the wet-cut technique. Inez's lawyer turned to the Count and said that he should see that a technique was used that would gently blur the boundaries of the objects. McDowell made his assumption that it was likely that the Earl was not familiar with painting workshop streets. Earl's counsel began to contradict and say that it was just a disclaimer. The judge asked the defendants if the Count and the Countess could tell the real story of the painting. Inez began to say that the street of the workshops was the second street, and this view was painted from the second floor of the atelier of Mr. Lant. The lawyer turned to his ascendancy and remarked that the judge himself could see that the Count had no information about the work in question. The judge turned to the Count and asked why the Count was so confused if he was sure his claims were true. There was already a commotion in the room and the Earl's lawyer started. The man turned to His Excellency and said that with all due respect to him, he must realize that his client was greatly distressed about the divorce case, so the judge should be sympathetic, for the Count's testimony might be inconsistent. After all, the Count and the Countess vowed to love each other and sealed that promise with the bonds of marriage, after which the defendants lived what the Count believed to be a perfect life. And how frustrated and confused Ryan must be to have his wife divorce him. The Countess's lawyer realized that Turner just wanted to get off topic by talking about emotions and thus make everyone in the room sympathetic. Turner turned to the Countess and said that he understood her too, because after the wedding, the Count could not remain as faithful as before, but don't all men have an inevitable social life? The Count's lawyer kept pressing the sting and saying that women get lonely quickly, and at the same time the Count was absent, and most likely Inez was very disappointed. But resorting to perjury was too much. These words surprised the protagonist because all her regrets, anger, and he says it's all a lie. Turner turned to the king and said that the Countess herself did not really want so much fuss, so he asked the judge to withdraw the case and leave the spouses together. Inez stood up and asked Turner if his firmness about his social life was that of loving one and being with another woman. The Count was shocked and didn't even know what to say. He pretended not to realize which woman he was talking about. The Countess picked up a newspaper and said that this was the latest issue of Elton, and this issue accused her husband of immoral behavior with clear evidence. People were handed newspapers and realized that this woman was Charlotte Jason. It was no surprise to everyone that they had become so friendly. People began to think that the Countess wanted a divorce purely because of the Earl's immoral behavior. The lawyer's statement revealed that the artist with the god's hand was the Countess. Inez said loudly that the perfect family life that Turner is talking about didn't exist originally. After all, Ryan only wanted the title and reputation of an artist. Ryan jumped up and yelled that it was lies and the ravings of a crazy woman. Turner tried to calm the Count, who tried to run to Inez. The king watched the whole thing. Edward said he had listened carefully to both sides, and thinks that if the non-obvious facts are set aside, a decision can be made about their case, and then they will do so. The spouses, Earl and Countess, must now redraw the alley of workshops. There were outrages heard from Turner that this is after all a sacred court, and this is no place for such a thing. Edward said with a smile that he was willing to do it for a just judgment, and he added that he thought the Countess's side was ready, and in that case they would begin the authentication. The Count and the Countess were provided with canvases and materials. They began their work. Some time passed, and they were ordered to finish now and set the items aside. The inspection of the Countess and Count's work began. The king asked for a moment, for he wanted to ask the Countess a question before the inspection. The man asked if Inez really wanted to divorce Ryan. Edward said that the Countess's goal was to restore her good name and property rights. He asked if she would be willing to continue to live a married life with the Count if he would guarantee her all her rights in the name of the king. Inez was very much surprised, and the Duke did not understand his brother's question either. Inez asked what His Highness was talking about now. The king repeated that Inez's goal was to restore her good name and her right to property, and if he guaranteed this in the king's name, would the Countess agree to continue to live a married life with the Count? Inez said no, because when Ryan proposed to her, she thought that marriage would make up for everything she lacked in her life and give her the family the Countess didn't have. Inez believed that the Count would help her forget her anxieties because she would no longer be the sole head of the family. However, now the protagonist has realized that what will complete her life is not marriage. It's the feeling of noticing the little things. It's meeting countless people. Inez does not regret one bit that she started the divorce process, and even more so, the protagonist does not want to go back to the past. Divorce is about finding a new life for the protagonist. And it really is. The king accepted the girl's words and said that he will take them into consideration. The king said that based on the investigative experiment to determine the real author of Workshop Alley, and after listening to the speech of both sides, a verdict will be made. Edward voted that from this moment, the marriage of the spouses of the Earl and Countess of Briarton is declared dissolved. The judge said that the title of the head of the Briarton family, which belonged to the former husband Ryan Gott, is returned to Inez Briarton. The Duke immediately rejoiced. King Edward added that this decision is not subject to appeal and the case is closed. In the hall began a stir. Everyone was shocked that the petition for divorce was granted, and now the girl will have to be called the head of the family Briarton. Everyone was very curious as to who the former Earl would now be. Ryan tried to jump to Inez but was pushed away by the Duke, who stood in front of the girl. The Duke asked if the man wanted to speak to the Countess of Briarton. Ryan began to ask His Excellency that he would like to speak to Inessa for a moment. The Duke said that the Countess was sure to be tired after the court session, and it would be good for the man to speak to her at the next opportunity. The Countess and the Duke started to leave, and Ryan kept yelling and calling for Inez. The Duke took the Countess to a place where the reporters wouldn't be able to get in. The protagonist thanked the Duke, but only wanted to say that this was a passageway for royalty only, as the king himself did so from behind. The Countess turned around and saw the king behind her. The man told her to thank the Duke, as he had asked very much to be allowed to use this passageway. The Duke was very angry about this. The king remarked that the bravery Inez had shown today was very entertaining. Edward said that this absence would be a good precedent, and he hopes to re-inspire other nobles suffering similar situations. So Edward was leaving here in high spirits. The man waved his hand and said goodbye, saying he would see the Countess of Briarton again. Inez wished His Highness well and bowed. Enoch asked the Countess if she was all right, and added that his brother, that is, His Majesty, had always been a sort of prankster. Inez was very happy that she had just regained the title of head of the family. That nightmarish past would not return again. Inez cried and was very grateful to the Duke. The Duke of Sussex was very frightened and did not understand why the Countess was crying. He tried to calm her down, and the girl said that it was from gratitude. Enoch smiled and said that Inez had done everything herself, and she should not drink tears on such a joyful day. The Duke remarked that the Countess had a very hot forehead. At first, Inez didn't understand what he was talking about, but then she added that she also felt a little dizzy. The Duke rushed to her aid. He grabbed the girl and asked if she was all right. Looking around, the man started calling for help. Inez was very embarrassed. However, her heart was calmer than ever. Charlotte was very angry and was tearing up the newspaper. She called Inez a crazy girl who thought Charlotte would calmly bitch it all out. The woman was furious and said she would certainly take every last thing from her. The Countess was awakened from the morning. The protagonist was frightened and surprised that she was in her room in the manor. She did not remember what happened in court and feared that it all seemed like a dream. Mary was glad that her mistress was already awake. Inez jumped up in horror and said she had no memory of returning to the manor. The Countess asked how the trial had gone. Mary, upon reflection, immediately smiled and said that her mistress had won in court, and she was now the full head of the Briarton family. Mary said that from now on she would not call her Countess but Mistress. Inez said it wasn't the time for that. The maid said that His Excellency the Duke had taken her mistress to the manor, and they were to give a reception to celebrate the return of the title, so the hassle would be out of turn. Remembering, the maid said that a gift from the Duke had also been delivered for her mistress. This surprised Inez greatly, and she saw a basket of flowers and a newspaper, and a note that said the Duke wished her a speedy recovery. Inez thought about the fact that when they first met, she was painting a still life with the same flowers. The protagonist noticed that the Duke was really very attentive, and his handwriting was very beautiful. Seeing the newspaper, the girl there read that the case of divorce of the spouses of the Earl and Countess Briarton ended with the victory of the wife. And in fact, the hand of God turned out to be Inez. This article described in detail everything that happened yesterday at the trial, and His Excellency made a lot of effort, and now the protagonist should also clean up some things. Ryan shouted and didn't understand what the hell was going on. He turned to the men and asked who allowed them to come into his atelier. Inez came up behind him and said she was the one who allowed it. The man ran up to the girl and knelt down in front of her, begging her to think again. Ryan repeated over and over that he was an idiot and just plain stupid. After all, no one could turn their back on a good wife like Inez. Ryan kept saying that he deserved to die, but he was begging for just one more chance. And we were asked if Heaven was aware that this atelier was made just for him. This atelier was made from the smallest of details. Furniture and wallpaper and every tube of paint. The main character personally picked out every single detail for her husband. And in this very atelier, he was making out with her friend Charlotte and doing obscene things. Inez said she believed both her husband and Charlotte, and he was just laughing at her. Inez turned around and congratulated Ryan Gott on his divorce and said that she wished him a good life even though she didn't know how happy his future would be. The woman started to walk away. Ryan couldn't let that happen, so he started to crawl after her and tried to grab her, but he was pushed away by the guards and culturally asked to move away. Inez didn't even think about how much she cared about the people who always tried to be on her side, and in her past life she never thought about it. Inez, with a wide smile, asked the guards to get Mr. Ryan Gott out of the manor. Her ex-husband yelled and tried to even threaten, but he was simply escorted out. Mary came up to the lady and handed her a handkerchief. Inez was very grateful. Suddenly, the Duke of Sussex entered the room. The man greeted and said that the Countess had perfectly handled the situation herself, and he did not even have time to put a word in. The protagonist was surprised and asked how he got here. The Duke said that he was just passing by her estate, and the servant told him where to find her. Looking around, the man asked if the premises was her ex-husband's atelier. Inez agreed it was and said it was all for Ryan, and she put her heart and soul into making this place for him. However, now Inez is just getting rid of her ex-husband. After all, they could make a better place here now, like showrooms or something. Enoch realized that he was acting like a fool himself because he was constantly sad every time the Countess talked about her husband. The man didn't know why his brother had assigned him to this particular case. Well, now he understood. Enoch asked the Countess if she remembered her promise to treat him to dinner when it was all over. Of course, the protagonist remembered everything, but she was a little sad because now that the trial was over, she would no longer be able to see His Excellency. So she said that she remembered everything and would not just treat the Duke to dinner, but would pay him for his help with whatever she could and whatever he asked for. The Duke smiled and said that he wanted Inez to paint his portrait himself. Enoch himself realized that this was a man he would like to see just a little more often. The Countess began to paint and asked the Duke to turn his head slightly to the right. The Duke was lying on the sofa and the maids were trying to make the composition a little more interesting. The man himself said that he thought a plain composition would be fine too. The Countess apologized and simply said that at the thought of having this portrait painted as a thank you for the favor Inez had received, one gets energized. The divorce case was finalized, and His Excellency met with the protagonist to paint the portrait. The protagonist said she would start the sketch. Enoch thought about in a conversation with his brother, who asked if he had any feelings for the Countess. The man was uncomfortable with it, and his brother said he was just joking. The king said it was just the first time he had ever seen a duke use his name and status to help someone. Edward was curious because his brother, who had never once said what he liked, had never once said what he wanted, and so he kept asking if Enoch really thought nothing much of the Countess. It was only now that the man agreed that his brother had really figured it out. At first, the Duke had been interested in the Countess because of her genius, but now things were different. Now Enoch is interested in Inez as a woman. The protagonist said her sketch was ready. Inez praised the Duke for doing a good job, but he said that she had been writing and the girl was probably even more tired. The Duke looked at the sketch with fascination, and Inez suggested that he liked it, and the man with a smile confirmed it and added that Inez had written so beautifully that he even liked it. The Countess said that she thought she would need a little more time to work on the color, so they would probably need to meet again. Just in case, the girl asked if that would make it difficult for him. The man said not at all, but noted that it might be too burdensome for the Countess herself. After all, Inez only kept the atelier to work on his portrait, and the man asked if it would not be more convenient for the woman to remodel the room. It may have been Ryan's atelier before, but it is now the place where Inez is painting His Excellency's portrait. Inez said it was probably like getting rid of bad memories by covering them up with good ones. The protagonist didn't understand why she was so embarrassed. The Duke smiled and said that, hence her saying he was a good memory for her, and that made him very happy. Inez thought about the fact that the Duke might be interested in her, but she immediately rejected it, for she could not know what was in His Excellency's heart, and therefore should not make up too much. And if so, what about the protagonist, because she writes much more carefully than before and she is calmer when she is near His Excellency. The woman realized that she was probably attracted to him. Suddenly, a bucket of water fell. The protagonist said that she would call a servant. The protagonist realized that she couldn't have anything with the Duke because no one dates so soon after divorce proceedings. If anyone questioned the nature of their relationship, things could be very bad. The Countess was forced out of her thoughts by the Duke's voice, who asked if she was all right, for she had an unhealthy complexion. Inez said that she was fine and that the color was because she was a little tired. The woman realized that His Excellency was a really good man, but she couldn't tarnish his reputation because of feelings she wasn't sure about yet. The protagonist decided that she'd better cut off the possibility of any relationship right away. Inez said she was very tired and asked the Duke if they could call it a day. The Countess and the Duke said goodbye. The girl wished him a good trip, and he in turn wished the girl a good rest. The man rejoiced because Inez was now both Countess and artist, and head of the Briarton family. Enoch remarked that it was a great honor to see her wings spread out like that. The Duke smiled and said that he was very much looking forward to telling her that and seeing her reaction. After wishing her a good evening, the Duke got into his carriage and drove away. The Countess didn't understand what she should do now.